Some of the words you say every day were born in chains, not in classrooms, not in poetry, not in freedom. They were whispered in fields soaked with sweat, shouted across auction blocks, spat out by men who believed other human beings were livestock. And some of them, words people laugh at, sing in songs, type in comments, carry a history so violent, so twisted, that once you hear it, you may never say them the same way again. Today, we're stepping into the language of slavery. Not the dates, not the textbooks, but the words. Because slavery didn't just scar bodies. It rewired the English language itself. And the echoes are still here. Every time someone says boy, every time someone calls another person uppity, every time someone casually drops a profanity like motherfucker, without knowing what that word may have meant in a world where families were systematically torn apart. This isn't a lesson. This is a reckoning. Let's begin where language turned human beings into property. In the 17th and 18th centuries, as the transatlantic slave trade expanded under European empires, particularly the British colonies that would later become the United States, a new vocabulary emerged. A vocabulary of ownership. Cargo. That word wasn't always innocent. In the ledgers of slave ships crossing the Atlantic, African men, women, and children were listed alongside sugar, tobacco, and rum. Cargo, not people. Units, inventory. On manifests from ships like those that docked in Charleston and New Orleans, humans were counted, priced, insured. Language made it easier. Then there was stock, breeding stock, field stock, the same term used for cattle. The reduction was deliberate. When you redefine a person as livestock, you remove the moral barrier to cruelty. And so the words evolved. On plantations across the American South, enslaved men were often referred to as bucks. Strong ones were called prime bucks. The implication was clear. Animal, studded out a body for labor, a body for forced reproduction. Enslaved women were called wenches. Originally an Old English word meaning girl or servant, it mutated in the colonies. It became sexualized. A breeding wench wasn't a woman. She was a womb, not a commodity. The term breeding itself, used openly in plantation records, referred to the forced reproduction of enslaved people to increase a slaveholder's wealth. No romance, no consent, just economic strategy. And this is where language becomes darker. Because slavery didn't just create insults. It created entire ways of thinking. Take the word boy. On the surface, harmless. But in the Jim Crow South, the system of racial segregation that followed slavery, white men routinely called black adult men boy to assert dominance. It wasn't about age. It was about hierarchy. You are not a man. You are permanently beneath me. Even today, in certain contexts, that word carries the weight of that history. Then there's girl. Black women, regardless of age, were called gal or girl. Infantilized, diminished, because adulthood implied autonomy, and autonomy was forbidden. Now consider uppity. It sounds almost quaint, old-fashioned, but in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was weaponized against formerly enslaved people who dared to assert independence. A black man who bought land, uppity. A black woman who spoke her mind, uppity. The message was clear. Know your place. The word auction became something else too. Slave auctions were theatrical brutality. Families lined up, teeth inspected, muscles squeezed, children separated. The phrase going, gone didn't mean a vase or a painting. It meant a human life disappearing into someone else's ownership. And then there's runaway. In advertisements printed in colonial newspapers, slaveholders described escaped enslaved people as runaways. Like lost property, like stray dogs. Descriptions were detailed: scar on left cheek, brand on shoulder, speaks broken English, reward offered. The word reward, in this context, meant money for returning a human being to bondage. Language transformed pursuit into professionalism. Now we step into something even more uncomfortable. The word master. It meant owner, controller, absolute authority. Enslaved people were forced to say it. Master. Even in religious contexts, Christianity was manipulated to reinforce obedience. Verses about servants obeying masters were emphasized. Submission became sacred. And from master, we get master bedroom, originally referring to the largest bedroom in a house, historically tied to the head of the household. But in the American South, that head of household often owned slaves. Language carries residue. Then there is the word picnic. Some historians argue it derives from the French pique-nique, meaning a social gathering. But in the American South, lynchings were sometimes treated as public spectacles. Families gathered, food was brought, children watched, while a black person's body hung from a tree. Though the etymology of picnic is debated, the cultural association of racial violence as communal entertainment is historically documented. Language can be innocent in origin, yet stained in practice. Now we approach the most explosive territory, the N-word, born from the Spanish and Portuguese word negro, meaning black. It evolved in English into one of the most dehumanizing slurs in history. It was printed in laws, written in advertisements, carved into signs. It justified violence. It justified segregation. It justified slavery. It stripped identity down to skin. Even today, its history makes it one of the most charged words in the English language. And then, there's motherfucker, a word people use casually now, in anger, in humor, in music. Its exact origin is debated. Some scholars trace it to general taboo profanity around incest, which has existed across cultures. But within the context of American slavery, forced sexual exploitation was systematic. Enslaved women were raped by slaveholders. Children were born into slavery as property. Family lines were shattered. In such an environment, sexual violence and forced breeding were realities. While historians caution against simplistic origin stories claiming the word was invented specifically during slavery, the grotesque dynamics of incestuous assault and coerced reproduction were undeniably part of that world. And profanity born in a society soaked in sexual violence takes on a different shade. Imagine a world where a man could impregnate an enslaved woman, then sell his own biological child. Imagine children fathered by their enslaver growing up enslaved by their own blood. Language in such a world does not remain clean. Then there's field hand, house slave, driver. A driver wasn't someone operating a vehicle. It was an enslaved person forced to supervise and punish other enslaved people under a white overseer's orders. Divide and control. Even the word plantation was softened. It sounds pastoral, green, idyllic. But plantations were labor camps, surveillance states, sites of torture. The word overseer meant a white man who enforced discipline, often with whips. The word whipping post wasn't metaphorical. It was infrastructure. Then came emancipation. Freedom, on paper. But language shifted again. After the Civil War, new terms appeared. Convict leasing. Black men arrested on minor or fabricated charges. Leased to private companies. Forced labor. Slavery by another name. Chain gang. Men shackled together. Building roads. Under-armed guard. The word vagrancy was used to criminalize unemployment. And unemployment was inevitable for newly freed people denied land and resources. Language became a legal trap. Even the phrase separate but equal, later upheld in Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, was linguistic deception. Separate was never equal. But the words made discrimination sound constitutional. Clean, reasonable. This is how oppression survives. Through vocabulary, through normalization, through repetition. Some words were born directly from the economics of slavery. Others were reshaped by it. Some etymologies are debated, and historians disagree on precise origins. But what cannot be debated is this: slavery reshaped English. It embedded hierarchy into speech. It made ownership sound ordinary. It made cruelty sound administrative. And it made dehumanization conversational. The terrifying part isn't just that these words existed. It's that many of them still do. We use them, without hearing the chains rattling underneath. Language is memory, and sometimes it remembers what we try to forget. So the next time a word leaves your mouth, ask yourself, where did it learn to mean that? Because history doesn't just live in monuments. It lives in syllables. And some of those syllables were forged in the darkest chapters of human history.